much, everyone, for joining us here and online. It's a great pleasure to invite Dr. Usman Afzali today to have a conversation on long-term effects of far-right terrorism on Muslims in New Zealand on behalf of CARE. Mohan would have loved to be here and introduce Usman, but he's given me the opportunity to do this today. Thank you, Mohan. So without going into any more details, I'd like to call Usman to come and introduce himself, tell us a little bit about himself, and also the work that he's doing. Over to you.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, Kira, greetings. It's lovely to be here. So I'm Usman Afzali. I currently hold a postdoctoral position at University of Canterbury. I do research on the project that I call the Muslim Diversity Study that I will talk about at the end. But I also teach into research methods and neuroscience. I completed my PhD in psychology last year, and I hold a BSc and a BSc honors in psychology from University of Canterbury. In my past life, I used to be a GP. I was trained in medicine in Afghanistan. So that's my background. I'll not talk too much about it, but before I start talking about today's work, I want to thank everyone who has given me this opportunity, Professor Mohan, Dr. Fatima, everyone else in CARE, and also those who are watching online or will watch the recording later. I have a couple of disclaimers to make before I talk about the topic. And the first thing is I'm not a native speaker, so please do not expect any eloquent terms and great vocabulary. I don't have that. Also, since it's a public talk, I'm trying not to be too technical. I will try to present large findings of some of the papers. And I joined the team of NZAVS, the New Zealand Attitudes and Values Study, as a collaborator in 2019. But they have been doing research on Muslim issues since way before. And I will introduce that a bit more in today's talk. I also want to say that I'm presenting their work. It's not my work. I have been part of some of the papers as a co-author. So I'm just trying to say that I'm not taking credit for the work that they have done. I'm not the first author on most of those papers, but in fact on any of those papers, but all of that work that was conducted by NZAVS inspires my current project. So there's a direct link there. I'm also trying to reiterate that I'm not going to provide any solutions for the far-right terrorism and its effects on Muslims in New Zealand. What I can do is to present the picture from different perspectives of research that we have been doing. And as you all would know, there are no absolutes in social sciences. So our job as researchers is to just present or find the nuance in what it might seem like common sense. That is how one of my mentors puts it, Kumar. So this is a quote from him. Anyways, to talk about the topic, we have a list of items I want to go through. I will put a context as to why this whole idea of research on Muslims is important to me on a personal level. I will introduce the NZAVS research and team. I will also present a case as to why we need to study Muslims in New Zealand. I will briefly present some of the findings of NZAVS, and I'll then briefly touch on my current work, which is the Muslim Diversity Study. So I started living in Christchurch in 2011, and I used to frequent to Al Nur Mosque. That is the biggest and the most prominent mosque in Christchurch, but also because I was living closer to that area. And new to New Zealand, I'm for the first time seeing Muslims from different backgrounds I haven't seen before, except in Pakistan, because I was a refugee in Pakistan. First time I'm seeing Arab Muslims, Kiwi Muslims, and this is fascinating to me. And there is one noticeable person. He has a very strong belt. He's white, tall, tattoos on his face and hands, and you cannot forget him. And I pray besides him, and it's fascinating to me, but also the question happens to me is like, why did you become a Muslim? Like, that is a question that always was with me, that what makes people, change their faith. And one day, so I know him as Salim Khattab, his name in the mosque was Salim Khattab, I know him as that. And one day I told him, hey, can you tell me your story as to why you became a Muslim? I'm really interested in that. And he said, give me some time so I will think about it and I'll let you know. A few years later he says, yes, why do you want to do a story? I said, I'm interested, I'm just curious. And at that time I'm not at university yet. It's 2011 or 12, I'm just working in a restaurant somewhere. So he tells me that he comes from a gang background. He was a gangster in Australia. His first name is C. He does not tell me the full name. His last name is Howard. He does not tell me the full name because he said it's dangerous for him if people know that he is in Christchurch. And I say, why? Because he says, I was a gangster and I was involved in a lot of gang wars in the city where I lived. But then one of those shootings, I was shot 3 times. And then I was in hospital and I thought I'm going to die. And then because my parents were religious, I thought I should find religion before I die. And that's what stayed with me. And then I recovered from that and I went in the search of religion. And because of his face tattoos and hand tattoos, he was not allowed in many places of worship, but he was welcomed into a mosque. And he had a lot of questions were answered, and that's how he finally became a Muslim. But he had to leave Australia, he had to come to New Zealand because those people haven't known that he has changed from inside. And he said, it was dangerous for me to be in Australia, that's why I came to New Zealand. So this guy, I got his story. I would still have the voice recordings of it. I translated it into Pashto, published it on a website in Afghanistan, and the story ended there. This person, a few months later, he disappeared from Christchurch. Fast forward to 2014, we get a news that 2 Kiwis, or a Kiwi and Australian, they were killed in Yemen, and they were part of ISIS. And one of them is this Salim Khattab, or Christopher Howard. The other was Darryl Jones. So Christopher Howard, he's the Australian guy that I interviewed, that I knew as Salim Khattab, and that came as a shock to me. Because I didn't see that coming. It was extremely surprising, also saddening. And then, of course, as a result of that, the media started picking on Al-Nur Mosque. And the family started saying that he was radicalized in Al-Nur Mosque. And one day I was praying late afternoon prayers, and some people from media came and they wanted to talk with someone in the mosque and ask if actually we are radicalizing people in Al-Nur Mosque. And the person who they were talking with, his English was weaker than me. And what he was saying, I was thinking, if that goes to the media, that will be really horrible. Because he did not know what he was talking about. And I told them, I said, hey, I know his life story. Do you want to hear from me? And they said, absolutely. How do you know his story? I said, I interviewed him. And next day, the story was in the media. But this is how they show me. They took, I don't know, dozens of photos. But I look very angry in this photo. I was not angry. I was just calm. I was saying the story. But this is how media picks, or how media chooses how to present the story. Now, this is in June 2014. A month later, this story comes. And here they still say that they were introduced radical Islam in a Nur Mosque in Christchurch. And we felt being watched. We were being watched. And this is a photo. So this person in the middle, that's me in my jacket, that olive jacket that you could see. And this other friend, he sent me the photo and he said, hey, we are becoming famous. Because people would come to Hagley Park, they will take photos of Masjid al-Nur, and they will put them, and they say, this is radicalized, this is a center who radicalizes people. And we would go there and pray on a daily basis. So until 15 March, we felt, and we always felt that we were being watched, we were being scrutinized going to Al-Nur Mosque. And so this is the background, this is the context. And doesn't surprise me that then research shows that news exposure predicts anti-Muslim prejudice. I will talk about this paper later. But this was the context I wanted to put, that where I come from, and this is before I started even studying psychology at University of Canterbury. So a little bit about the NZAVS lab. I think this is an important start because that will put into perspective as to where the research group is coming from. So it is, the full form is the New Zealand Attitudes and Values Study, started in 2009, and it's going to go for 20 years. Currently it is in 14th year, generally funded by the Templeton Religion Trust. They have access to electoral roll, and the questionnaire is sent to more than 100,000 people each year. And we have a large multidisciplinary research team, about more than 50 collaborators in New Zealand, more than 30 international. And currently we have 48,000 people who fill the questionnaire each year, which is about 1.5% of adult New Zealand population. In terms of questionnaire itself, it's an 8-page long. We also have the online version. It has content blocks, and some of those blocks keep changing because we also don't want to make it even longer than this. And it talks generally, or it presents a picture of social values and attitudes. So these are the topics that generally this questionnaire covers, from personality to dominance to right-wing, sexism, patriotism, affect toward different ethnic groups, attitude toward multiculturalism, immigration, well-being, health, psychological distress, intergroup contact, political party support, voting behavior, perceived discrimination, belongingness, ethnic identity, and so on. So these are the mix of questions that we have data on each year, and we could publish on them. In terms of representativeness, if we compare our sample with New Zealand census, it's very similar. In terms of ethnicity, as one could see here, in terms of gender, in terms of areas, we are very similar to New Zealand census. So we think that we are representing New Zealand population in this questionnaire. And also, with the data that we gather, we can also find migrant flow, because we ask a question, where were you born? And these questions come, on a yearly basis, rather than census, which comes after 5 years, I think. So, after introducing the research team briefly, I want to talk about why I thought there was need to study Muslims in New Zealand, and why the group thought that that was important. So, we have been seeing that in the US and Europe, there has been evidence of rising right-wing nationalism. However, in our previous data in New Zealand, we did not have evidence for that. Despite this, we still had substantial prejudice for minority groups, including Muslims. And the question that we use in NZAVS to measure discrimination with is what we call the warmth or affective thermometer. This is an example of it. So we ask our participants, rate your feeling of warmth toward following groups. Now this group has this many, so it's New Zealand Europeans, as you can see, Maori, Asians, refugees, overweight people, Muslims, people with mental illness, LGBT, and so on. And the lower one gets rated on this, in general, psychological theories predict that the more discrimination or prejudice could be present against that group on average. So that's the idea. So that means if you're getting a low warmth rating, that means there is increased prejudice or discrimination against you, possibility of that against you in general. And this is what we have found in one of our previous studies, that the rating is very low, the lowest for Muslims and Arabs, very similar, followed by immigrants in general, and then you could compare that with ratings of average rating of Maori and New Zealand European. Now this is despite the fact that most of Muslims, 1/4 of New Zealand Muslims are born in New Zealand. So here, Muslims are diverse here. In the 1990s, we had 5,000 Muslims. We currently, based on 2018 census, we have about 62,000. And I'm thinking the 2023 census would be way higher than that. I think it would be above 80,000. But again, in that, as you could see, about 1/4 of them are born in New Zealand. And it's also important to note that it is anticipated that although the growth in world population will be 32% by 2060, Muslim growth will be about 70%. And religion is part of our present and global future. This Pew Research forecast shows that by 2060, Muslims will almost be similar in number with Christians. This other map shows, it is what we call global worship map, and this shows the places of worship in around Auckland areas. And as we can see, there are so many of them. And it is thought that they drive hidden economy of charity and volunteering. So it is in general important for us to look at religion, but also to look at religious groups that are discriminated against. The other reason for that could be that because democracies need to educate people about religion, religious diversity, because freedom of expression and freedom of religion should be safe in democracies. Again, Muslims in New Zealand are very diverse. Although being 1.5% of New Zealand population, they are very diverse. This map shows that only the background of Al Noor Mosque attendees, like and you could see this. I think this is still an understatement. I feel like there is more than 50 countries where people who come and pray in Al Noor Mosque come from. So I must say that the NZAVS sample does not have a lot of Muslims in it. The population of Muslims, or the sample size of Muslims in NZAVS is less than 100. So that is a big limitation. But despite that, we still can see how are the ratings of Muslims on some of aspect of religiosity based on the data that we have from that limited number of Muslims. This shows that in terms of importance of religion in one's how important is your religion to how you see yourself. As you could see, Muslim rating is here, very close to 6. In terms of identifying as a spiritual person, as you can see, again, Muslims have high rating. In terms of seeing religion as generally as good, again, Muslims have relatively very high rating compared to other groups, despite a small population, as I mentioned. In terms of religious beliefs, there's a high, above 95% belief in God. This is belief in some sort of spirit of life or life phase. In terms of religious actions, a church or place of worship in the last month, we still have Muslims have high rating. In terms of reading religious scripture, and for Muslims that will be Quran, that is again high, as you can see here. In terms of praying, that again is very high, as you could see for Muslims compared to other groups. So this is a bit of a snapshot of religiosity of Muslims that we have found so far, despite small sample size. But what I want to present today is not how Muslims are in New Zealand, but how Muslims are perceived in New Zealand based on NZAVS data. And the reason for that is because of the small Muslim sample size, we cannot have meaningful inferences as to how they feel. But because everyone else has a chance to rate how much warmth they feel toward Muslims, we could look at those responses and see how Muslims are perceived in New Zealand. So this is one of the early papers. As you could see, this is before 2019. John Shaver, he is a lecturer at Otago University, a good friend. And he looked at this paper. He published this paper. So generally, it is theorized that inter-religious tensions fuel anti-Muslim prejudice. But the problem is there is some nuance. Different cultures, different contexts, different places show different attitudes. And as I mentioned earlier, we want to look at nuances. So they test a theory called evolutionary lag theory of religious prejudice and tolerance. And from this, what they find is that anti-Muslim and anti-Arab sentiments are confounded. They are widespread. But what they also find is that in support of evolutionary lag theory, the intensity, as you can see here, the intensity of religious commitment is associated with general increase in tolerance toward minority groups. Now, what evolutionary lag theory says is, it's a bit further, earlier here, and relatively, in countries like New Zealand, where there is historically low level of conflict between religious groups, then higher religious affiliation could help in general, and high religious affiliation increases tolerance toward minority groups. That could be even toward Muslims also. What this means in general terms is that it could be highly religiously affiliated people, like Christians in New Zealand, that they could show more tolerance toward everyone and Muslims. That is what the theory predicts, and this is because there has not been religious conflict in New Zealand. So if there is conflict in other countries, that finding will be different. But in New Zealand, this says that religious groups could help mitigate prejudice or intolerance toward minority groups, including other religious groups. So this is why they call religion and unmaking of prejudice toward Muslims. And this is again based on NZAVS data. So the other one, the paper that I showed you earlier, News Exposure Predicts Anti-Muslim Prejudice. Generally, it was thought that media has a role in promoting prejudice toward Muslims, but also the link was not established, if there is a link between media exposure. And also, it was thought that people interpret news in ways that confirm their pre-existing attitudes, which would mean that regardless of how media presents a group, people should not be influenced. But these findings showed that there is, in fact, evidence of media-induced Islamophobia in New Zealand. That means the greater news exposure is associated with both increased anger toward Muslims and reduced warmth toward Muslims. And now that, of course, this is 2017. And as you could see, as I mentioned earlier, what happened in 2014 and following that, I'm not surprised that this could be the case. And importantly, that does not vary with political ideology. So it means that it is the widespread representation of Muslims that drives anti-Muslim prejudice. Again, that's how media presents. And then, of course, we had the 15 March shootings. And after that, I started collaborating in a very small capacity with the team. And the research I'm presenting now is mostly after 15, all of them is after 15 March. So this is within a month of the shooting. And because we had data from NZAVS, in fact, I have to give it to the New Zealand Journal of Psychology, who had a special issue, and there's many articles regarding Muslim values and attitudes and issues and how Muslims are perceived in New Zealand. And a lot of those were based on NZAVS work. So that was a very thick spatial issue. This was 15th April. In this paper, we looked at 4 things that could define a true New Zealander based on responses from national sample. Being from a European or Maori ancestry, being able to speak English, having New Zealand citizenship, and respecting New Zealand political systems and laws. And we found that the more people believe that true New Zealander is a person from European or Maori ancestry, so or the more people believe that a true New Zealander is a person who speaks English, the more negative they have, the more negativity they express about Muslims, and the more opposition they express toward diversity. This basically means if the more you think that you have to be from a specific ancestry to be considered a true New Zealander, or being able to speak a specific language, more likely you are to have prejudice toward Muslims. Now, this was, of course, a bit of a surprise to me, but that is the sample size of this paper is 14,000 out of 47,000 at that stage who responded to this question. And then when this was out, the NZAV's team was asked, different people started asking further questions about it. And then we had a follow-up. In this one, we were looking at historical attitude toward Muslims for as long as we had data. And at that stage, we had data from 2012 until 2018 because the warmth toward Muslim question was added between those years. So this is, in this paper, we show that levels of warmth toward Muslims in New Zealand were comparatively low relative to warmth ratings to other groups. This is the overall finding. And there is a chart, it's not a very nice one, but this shows that warmth toward Muslims has been the lowest historically compared to all other groups. That could be Asians, immigrants in general, Chinese, Indians. But we also see that there is a small steady increase across these years from 2012 up to 2018. So people are showing increased warmth on a yearly basis. So there's a slow, steady increase. But again, this is the lowest toward Muslims, followed by other groups. And one important thing that I need to mention here is that these are the same people who are responding to these questions. So we call this panel data. We collect data from the same people each year. So this shows us that the same people's attitudes are changing. And we don't know, there could be a variety of reasons behind that. It could be that people become more tolerant, or people age, or they get more exposure to Muslims and so on. Could be a variety of reasons for that, but that increase is happening, as you could see, to all other immigrant groups too. This was one of the major findings of this paper that was kind of eye-opening to us. And then, of course, after 2019, because the data collection was continuing, we were also able to look at how attitude toward Muslims is changing after 15 March. So this is the first paper. After that, we looked at data 7 days after, a month after, and 90 days after the shooting, and compared with the same data before shooting. So the shooting day was our time zero. For those of us who were well versed with statistics, we used the regression discontinuity design here. And here what we found is that there was immediate increase in warmth toward Muslims as a result of Christchurch shooting, or following Christchurch shooting. And that was for both left-wing and right-wing individuals. But in the aftermath, there was, for conservatives, there was a reversion back to the pre-attack levels after 3 months, while for liberals or left-wings, there was a kind of a bit of a steady increase. So this showed us that with the shooting, there was a little bit of shift in attitude toward Muslims, or increase in warmth toward Muslims. And there's another paper. So this one shows that steady increase in general. So this was pre-attack and this is post-attack. And as you can see, it plateaus a little bit with the time. Now this one is, we have data here 6 months after and 6 months before the attack. And here we are looking at 4 constructs. We are looking at terrorism anxiety. We are looking at sense of community. We are looking at psychological distress. And we look at well-being. So, as we would have anticipated, with the shooting, terrorism anxiety has increased. And we had a paper before this also that showed the same. Terrorism anxiety basically means that people were more afraid of terrorist attacks happening in New Zealand in general. And that was that was like what we anticipated too, so confirmed our hypothesis. But also, sense of community basically means social cohesion. We came closer to each other as a community regardless of our backgrounds. So that was also increased following shootings. But what we found interesting was that there was no significant change in psychological distress in general in New Zealanders. That was counterintuitive, and also in well-being. And one could think that, we had evidence that, for example, in Charlie Hebdo shootings, or in Norway, there was increase in psychological distress. But those groups were qualitatively different from Muslims because they were mainstream institutions. And here, a small minority religious group was attacked. So that there's a qualitative difference between the group that was attacked in New Zealand compared to those groups that were attacked overseas. And there could be an explanation for that. One explanation could be that sympathy versus empathy. So it could be that there was, the concern was expressed as, I feel for you, but I don't necessarily feel as you. So there is more, the response in general in New Zealand was more of a sympathy response than empathy response. And it could make sense. The reason for that will be that, Muslims are a very small minority in New Zealand, and also it will be unreasonable to anticipate that every New Zealander has met a Muslim. And also Muslims were attacked within their place of worship. So the anxiety that I feel when I go to Al-Nur Mosque, that is not shared by a person who does not regularly attend Al-Nur Mosque. So it made sense for the psychological distress and overall well-being not to go high, but for terrorism anxiety and sense of community to go high. So this was again a very interesting finding that we had. And finally, this year we had this paper. And this is a more interesting paper in a sense that we are doing causal modeling here. We want to see what was the causal effect of Christchurch shooting on attitude toward Muslims. Now, here we have data until 2022, early 2022. So we look at these data and we find that attacks initially boosted Muslim acceptance in general. And also, contrary to our previous paper, that magnitude boost was similar across both political spectrums. So we think that the decrease we found in conservatives in another paper of 2021, that was kind of some anomaly. We also found, so we compared this with negative controls. So why we say that it was a causal increase? Because we looked at other groups. For example, attitudes toward elderly were not boosted. Toward those with mental issues were not boosted, like those with mental well-being issues. Attitude towards overweight people, so we call them negative controls. Towards them were not increased or not boosted, but only toward Muslims was boosted. And also, we found that there was 5 years worth of growth in Muslim acceptance. Like the boost that we had as a result of that one day of shooting was similar to the boost that we would have, the gain that we would have in 5 years if there were a steady increase, as we showed in our 2020 paper. So there's a boost like this, that is 5 years gain. Now, importantly, this is a causal paper. So based on this paper, we argue that shooting caused boost of acceptance toward Muslims, and this has a silver lining there. We argue in this paper that although the terrorists' intention was to hurt the community and to make the Muslim community look bad or be seen in negative light, in fact, it backfired and people started accepting Muslims more. So this is our recent paper. But despite these findings, we thought, I was thinking that, well, these papers had some limitations, in my opinion, not necessarily methodological limitations, but we could not, because they have a low Muslim representation, we could not see how Muslims perceive themselves. To me, that's more important. That how I see myself, or how every Muslim in New Zealand sees himself or herself. Also, we don't know much about Muslim resilience. I was working with another research team in 2019, and a professor came to me from Otago University. I just bumped into him. He's like, "Why are Muslims so resilient? I'm really surprised." And I was like, I wanted to say that it's a religious belief, but we are scientists, and unless I have evidence to present, I cannot just argue that. So I wanted to look at further at Muslim resilience. We also do not know much about Muslim diversity. We just have a snapshot, but I want to look further into that. Again, with NZAVS, we can find how happy everyone is with government and police and different services and healthcare, but we don't have data on Muslims in that relation. So that's why the Muslim diversity study was born. It is an NZAVS variation. It's exactly same questionnaire, but the idea is to collect more data from Muslims, because we only have less than 100 Muslims in this whole 48,000 sample of New Zealand. I'm personally interested in looking at flourishing, resilience, meaning making, what makes us thrive, what makes us flourish. I'm also interested in diversity and perceived discrimination, because we see from a general New Zealander's perspective that we argue that Muslims are discriminated against, or there is prejudice toward Muslims. But I want to see the Muslim side, that, do really Muslims also feel discriminated, or maybe religion is a protective factor there? Who knows? Also, it gives us a chance to compare the ratings of Muslims on different social values and attitudes that I explained, tens of them, with other faith groups. Now, we want to collect data from 3,000 Muslims across New Zealand. If each city that has more than 1,000 Muslims is included: Palmerston North, Dunedin, Christchurch, Wellington, Hamilton, and Auckland. We want to, of course, publish high-quality scientific research about Muslims. We want to facilitate scientific research opportunities for the Muslim community, so we are open to collaboration to anyone who wants to publish on these issues, or the issues that are captured by NZAVS. With this, we also want to bring the Muslim community closer to science, because we are underrepresented in science. As a result of these findings, we will be able to facilitate advocacy for Muslim community, because we have evidence of that again in the past. NZAVS has been time and time again approached by government. Of course, we are an independent entity. We are Auckland University-based research group. But our findings are scientific findings, and we have evidence of being asked by government. For example, I can give you an example. We had a question a couple of years ago about how happy you are with New Zealand's government's response to COVID-19. And because at that time census was not happening, it was an important question for government to ask, and we had data on that. Similarly, that CARE is being approached by government, and they ask questions about what you have found and not. NZAVS also has that evidence, and we believe that with our findings we might be able to provide some of the evidence-based or science-based data to Muslim community, their leadership, and organizations, that they could go and advocate for Muslim rights. And I must say that I'm a researcher myself. I'm not an advocate myself, but our data will be available for anyone to use. So our initial step was to recruit research assistants across New Zealand. We have 10 RAs in Auckland. We have 5 in Christchurch, 3 in Wellington and Hamilton. We have 1 in Dunedin and 1 in Palmerston North. That is Michelle sitting here. We also have been consulting and seeking advice from Muslim community and leadership and academics. I have started that consultation process last year in 2022, and Dr. Fatima was one of those who I consulted with, and many other academics and leadership. So sometimes we deliver inaugural talks, or sometimes we just come and talk with the community, or we have a talk like this. We also reach out to Muslim community via mosques, organizations, cultural associations, respected community elders, foundations, and so on. One thing that I found during my consultation last year was that, so the question that I have been always asked by Chris and everyone else who I was trying to collect data from Muslims, as Chris Sibley is the lead of the NZDVS, and he was like, why do you, as a result of your consultation, why do you think that Muslims were less likely? Because we send them questionnaires. Why do you think they don't fill them? Why we have less than 100 participation? And I have a few answers to that from what I found so far. First thing is, all Muslims are not in the electoral roll. So there's less likelihood of getting the questionnaire because we might not be New Zealand residents. We might be on work visa. And probably, or we might not have enrolled ourselves in the electoral roll. The second, the most important point here is, you receive a questionnaire in your mailbox, and some NZDVS is asking you to fill that and ask your personal information, and a lot of attitudinal and value questions. Why would you answer that? There's no trust. I come from Afghanistan. I'm very unlikely to fill a questionnaire just like that if I don't know why are you asking that. So the trust is really important. And the reason I'm traveling to different cities is to present our work and also see if we can build trust with the community and go to community via trusted people. We present our side. We don't want to oversell this. We just want to see this is what it is. This is what we have or what we can offer. This is a chance for community to represent themselves and to raise their voice, and we can give you a means. Of course, we are not saying that we are, answering a lot of questions, but I personally think that it's a step to the right direction. And of course, one complaint that we always had was that, everyone comes and asks questions and collects data. They don't come back and tell us what the findings were. We want to go back and present our findings to the community. We will have brief reports in A4-page reports that anyone could use, like those who don't know, non-science readers should be able to use them. We will have infographics, and of course we will have scientific publications. We also want to present our findings to government organizations, hoping that it will influence key decision and policy for the good of the Muslim community. We also want to help or give means to organizations to advocate for Muslim rights. And with the higher representation, we might be able to even find out ethnicity-based or geography-based problems. For example, we might be able to see what are the problems of Muslims in Palmerston North versus Christchurch versus Auckland, if we have good representation. So this is the core team. I feel bad to say that I'm leading it, and I have these people who are supporting me. I shouldn't be the lead here, but they are very kind. Joseph Bulbulia is my direct supervisor. He's a professor of psychology at Victoria University of Wellington. Chris Sibley is the lead of NZDVS. He has been doing amazing work in this area. Kumar, my personal mentor, I could say, he's an associate professor at the University of Canterbury, and I have been working with him for the last 8 years. He had a lot of influence in my work because my background is in cognitive psychology. This is social psychology. So it was Kumar that I came to this team. And we have Arif Rashid. He is a lawyer. He has published some papers with us. We have more than 20 RAs. We have numerous collaborators. We are hoping that we'll have a few collaborators from this also. I mean, Dr. Fatima has kindly agreed to be our collaborator, Mahbub. We also have a Muslim reference group that I have consulted with last year, and we are adding more people to that. We are more than happy to include other leaders, because one other thing that we want to do is, even after we collect data from Muslim community, we will not be just giving it to anyone to publish on anything. If a person comes with a question and a hypothesis, we will reach to our Muslim reference group and tell them that this person they want to do. Do you think it is okay for us to provide data for them so they can publish on those? And our Muslim reference group, of course, in this room that I could say that Dr. Fatima is one of those in our reference group also. So this is how this is our core team. But these are 6 photos that I have from my RAs that have given their photos to me. They are in different cities, but this is the whole list. So we have, as mentioned earlier, we have all these people, amazing team. But we also have a media and admin person in Christchurch. And one thing that I generally say is why we can do this, because not me, but NZ Davis, we have been doing this for the past 14 years. We have the infrastructure, we have the expertise, people, and funding. So far, NZ Davis has published more than 150 publications. Of course, not on Muslim issues. There's a lot of other issues in New Zealand, but that shows the strength of the research group. And our last year community consultation showed a very strong signal in terms of necessity for such a project. And finally, what I also want to see is what is in it for the Muslim community. So I want to say that it probably would discover nuance and diversity. We might be able to pinpoint some of the problems that the Muslim community has. We might be able to increase representation of Muslims in science. In fact, all the RAs that are with me, all of them can publish with us, and that is an open call to every one of them. Any of them who wants to publish with us, they will be able to publish on any facet of Muslim life that we have data on. And we will be able to provide some means for advocacy. We will be able to train researchers in the field. So the RAs who work with us, they will become researchers going forward. We will be able to find solutions for Muslim issues by Muslims. We will hopefully create established teams of Muslims who conduct research in these areas. And also we will be able to find some of the answers in relation to Islamophobia based on the data that we collect from social, cultural, and health. And we would see like how, for example, all these other factors or facets or constructs in life are affected or not affected by Islamophobia or the type of attitudes that exist against Muslims. Now, I'm not saying that I'm going to answer all of these questions myself. I'm only interested in flourishing, diversity, general well-being, but we have data on all these. So what I'm saying is that our research team or whoever collaborates with us, they might be able to publish on all these other areas. And that's me. So, I might not be able to answer a lot of questions, but if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to take them.
Thank you very much for this insightful conversation, and thank you for all the people who are here. If there are any questions, I see a couple of hands raised already. So we start with Zulfikar Bhai, if you want to go first.
Thank you, Dr. Afzali. That was really interesting findings. Can I ask, in any of the NZAVS or your part of studies, is there a definition of Muslim? Because I'm asking this question because one of your slides shows that 95% of Muslims believe in God. So yeah. I'm confused because to me, all the Muslims should believe in God.
Yeah.
So is there a definition of Muslim?
Now that is a bit puzzling to me too, to be very honest with you. The question that we ask is, so in NZAVS questionnaires that we have here, we ask them, do you believe in a religion? They say yes, no, and some of them they say, okay, I'm a Muslim. But also we ask them in terms of their religious affiliation, like in terms of how many times you attend or go practice or pray or read Quran and all that. So we do not have any definition per se, but because it's subjective, so anyone who identifies as a Muslim, they could say that yes, I'm a Muslim. We do not have any definition for it, simply because the questionnaire was built or developed 15 years ago by a team who, and we are very transparent about it, who are not Muslims. I probably am the only Muslim in the team. And we do have some questions that might even come across a little bit of even offensive. But we did not change them for a reason. A reason for that was if we change any questions, then the questionnaire becomes that we give to Muslims that becomes qualitatively different from question that we give to all other New Zealanders, then we cannot do one-to-one comparison. So we are open to changing some of the questions in the upcoming years, but for now we do not have a definition of Muslims in the questionnaire.
Can I ask another question? Sorry.
I'm sure. Yes.
Obviously, Al-Nur Mosque was not the biggest worship place for Muslims in New Zealand,
Yes?
right? And the person who attacked at Al-Nur Mosque was not a local person.
Yes.
How responsible do you think media is in projecting Al-Nur Mosque as a place of, creating these kind of evil, or, promoting radicalism and attracting someone from outside to, yes, this is the place you have to attack? Has somebody looked into this? Because he should have gone to Auckland, the biggest mosque, biggest gatherings.
Yeah.
So why did he come to Al-Nur?
I don't know, but I'm a little bit biased. Maybe that's why I presented my personal story of Al-Nur Mosque in the first place. But part of me thinks that a lot of over-representation of Al-Nur Mosque in the media prior to 15 March, and these are the two stories that I've shown. There are many other media reports on on those shootings. And in fact, in 2016, you will be very well aware that a person came and brought a head of a pig and put it in front of the mosque. So those things were happening against Al-Nur Mosque time and time again, which I don't know if happened to other mosques. In some mosques in Auckland that happened. So I cannot answer the question that you have asked. But one other thing that I can see in Christchurch, that escaping from Masjid al-Nur is very easy. In Auckland, traffic and all that, how easy for a person will be to escape and also make it to another mosque in 7 minutes and do the damage there. So this is, I think, an open question that anyone could answer to, but we, from a research perspective, have not looked at that question. It will be a very interesting question to look at, and anyone who does media research, if we can provide any data on that. In fact, the research I'm currently doing is mostly quantitative. We say it is a mile wide and an inch deep research. So we're not looking at a lot of issues, but we have a bird's eye view. What I'm hoping to be able to do in the future is to have further funding where we could qualitatively look at some of these issues further and deeper. And a lot of other Muslim issues that I'm hoping we could. But for now, it's a quantitative research. It is very limited in what we can present. If we can get 3,000 data sets from across New Zealand. Yeah. Sorry that I do not have very good answers to your questions.
Would anyone else have a question?
I actually have a question. You have actually mentioned one of the theories that, if I perceived it correctly, that if someone is more religious, will have more tolerance for others, right?
Yeah, that was the evolutionary lag theory.
Yeah, so are you expecting that theory is applicable on Muslims as well? Muslims in New Zealand?
So those who are more, so the evolutionary lag theory talks about the more affiliated you are with your religion. So that is one element. The more tolerant you will be, but also, so that's in general, since we didn't test it on Muslims. We just tested it generally in New Zealand. I don't know if anyone has tested on Muslims. But the second element of that also is that in places where there has not been any conflict between religions in those areas. So I, for example, come from Afghanistan. Like, there was no religious conflict in Afghanistan per se, but in the Middle East there has been. So this will be, again, a very good avenue to test. Now, if we can collect data on different Muslim groups in New Zealand, we might be able to see how their tolerance is toward other religious groups. And only at that stage we will be able to look or to have any findings. But because of low Muslim presence in NZDVS, we cannot answer that question yet.
And one related question, actually. Looking at those prior studies, we are actually looking at the attitude of non-Muslims
Yes.
towards Muslims.
Yes, generally, yes.
Are we testing any argument or any data? I mean, testing the attitude of Muslims towards others in
No,
New
no,
Zealand?
that again, so that is the current project that I'm working on. So we are hoping that if we can collect data from 3,000 Muslims across New Zealand, we will be able to see what is Muslim attitude toward Europeans, toward Maori, toward Pacifica. But we are limited at this stage because we only have less than 100. So if we get good representation from across New Zealand, and we hope we do, then absolutely, this is one of the questions we will be looking at, because we have seen warmth rating of Muslims by others, but we haven't seen warmth rating of others by Muslims, and that will be a comparison study that we will definitely look at if we get good representation, that we are hoping we will.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just to link with his question, and then I'll ask if anyone else has a question. This the lag theory that you were talking about, it said no conflict, right? And
Yeah.
like peaceful time.
Yeah.
And I know that New Zealand has been peaceful, but did it make any? Were there any differences when March 15th happened, or
So that paper was published in 2016.
before?
Yeah, and after 2016, we have not tested that yet. So that's another open question that we will have data, and if anyone wants to look at that question, again, considering we have answers to those questions, we still have those questions in ZDVS, that will be a very good question that one could look at, and we will be more than happy to provide data on that if anyone is interested to that will be, I think, a very, very good paper. Yeah, but no,
One other related, I was just thinking, looking at your graph, that when the blast happened, the attitude of others, non-Muslims towards Muslims, became quite positive. Now, I was actually looking at it from another perspective, that what if there is a religious terrorism or such an event by a Muslim, what will be the impact towards Muslims?
Well, the closest to that will be that 2014 incident that I mentioned earlier, that two Muslims that frequented an Al-Nur mosque, and then they were in Yemen. And as a result of that, we had over-representation, and we felt scrutinized by the media. But again, I also, part of me thinks that the low rating of Muslims could be a result of that, or also could be, like, I can tell you a personal, I don't want to make it too personal, but one day I lived in Addington in Christchurch, and I had a neighbor, and one day I'll just quickly say this, I mowed his lawn, and he was like, how much should I pay? I said, you don't have to pay me anything. And he was like, who are you? Like, why you do this? I said, you're my neighbor, you have rights on me. Which philosophy tells you that neighbors have rights? I said, I'm a Muslim, and in our religion, we are instructed to be good to our neighbors. And he was so surprised. He said, like, I always watch media and they say that you are crazy people, but you have always been nice to me. 2 years fast forward, when we were leaving that place, he was crying. So I think that media, it's not only New Zealand media, but general media representation really matters. Because, media likes to show that, these are a bunch of, this type of people, because they get clicks. But that, again, we want to show that with this type of research, we want to show that most of our values and attitudes are very similar to overall values and attitudes. Like, we are threatened by what we don't know. And we are hoping that with this type of research, we might be able to show the real values and attitudes of Muslims in New Zealand. And New Zealanders will feel like, okay, well, they are actually very similar to us. So why should we be threatened? Why should we be threatened by them? And we hope that with that, the level of Islamophobia will come down.
Yeah, so my question is like, thanks for the very concise presentation, and I really gained a lot from it. But my question is like, because you mentioned a lot about Muslims and the other communities in New Zealand.
Yeah.
So, do you have any insights on what the impacts? Like let's divide this question in the inter and intra-communal.
What do you mean by intra and
So
intra?
intra means within the Muslim communities themselves.
Okay.
So what did you have an insight, like what were the internal like the relations between the Muslim communities, did they improve? Because I know there are a lot of schisms in the community, in our communities as well.
Yeah.
So did we experience any improvement, or was there any like?
No, because again we didn't have data on that either before or after shooting. With less than 100 people, there was no way that we would go and explore that, compare that with 48,000. So that's why we are doing this, to see if anything changes. So we do not have good Muslim representation in science so far. And when we are thinking that, in the future we might be able to get there, but because we don't have data on Muslims, we cannot answer that question, sorry. I mean, there is always, qualitative evidence, or, what we see is happening in this, but that is not, it's not at all representative of what's really happening. Yeah.
For time?
Yeah.
Do we have?
Fatma, can I ask?
Oh,
Sorry.
we have time? Yeah, please. Yes. Imran here.
Just a quick, actually, follow-up for Fawad question as well, because I'm a bit more on a public policy person.
I'm aware.
And I can see that the data is showing that the Muslim acceptance is going up, and especially after this 15th March.
Yes.
My main question is why, whether it's a political kind of a, the Jacinda response, or whether there is a fear, whether there is a sympathy, you mentioned as well, or whether there is a fear that the Muslim will attack actually, because I got these jokes that we are now fearing you will take a revenge actually as well. And so that's so that's what is I thought, because the reason is if it's going just only for one incident, there's a possibility how now the situation in Gaza is going on, it will become reverse as well. Then it's become incident by incident rather than at the societal level. And so one is that question. I don't know. Sorry, I
can answer that.
I came late,
It's okay.
and so I might miss as well.
Can I answer that first?
Yeah.
Because I have an answer to that. And then you can ask your second question, because I'll also forget, sorry. So from the data perspective that we see, there could be a couple of explanations for that. One of them, each year we generally lose about 20% participants. So then we reach out to other people to collect data from. So chances are that we might have lost those who did not like Muslims, and as a result of that, the warmth rating might have improved. That could be one. Or they decided not to answer that question anymore. That could be one. And the second explanation to that will be, so it could be that we lost them, or it could be that those who had that type of attitude toward Muslims, they stopped responding to that question. So there could be two explanations. But one could also say that, well, maybe people felt like, no, we have been seeing them in the wrong light. I mean, maybe they are good people. But again, we only have data for the 2022. So the question is, yes, about political, government and all that. We'll only be able to see that going, like if we have, some data 2 years down the line and the government changes and we see if anything changes. I cannot anticipate, but that is a very difficult question to answer. Again, because as I mentioned earlier, our approach is mile wide and inch deep. So we do not know a lot of. We do not know very deep. We don't have a lot of deep responses, but we have generally a lot of wide responses in that sense.
Before Imran goes further, I just wanted to mention, if you've looked at, there is a theory which is called altruism born out of suffering, which basically means that when people suffer,
yes,
they or others feel sort of sympathy or empathy or warmth towards them.
Yes.
And I always wondered that March 15th, because there was suffering, we did see a lot of altruism being born out of that suffering.
Absolutely.
So if you have that, be good. If you haven't, I think it'd be something that you could look into, because it has really good theoretical foundation which explains why people feel that altruistic, I don't want to make it very theoretical, but that altruistic kindness or gentleness towards those who have suffered or suffering. So that's probably a good avenue.
I definitely think that following of that one paper on well-being and psychological distress, a follow-up of that will be extremely important, and that will hopefully answer this type of question, because at that time we were looking at only data 6 months before, 6 months after. Now we are like 3 years after or 4 years after that, and I think, and especially that now we also will hopefully have data on Muslims. That will be a very important question to look at. But just because we have data on a lot of constructs, but every researcher does not necessarily do the same thing each year. So they might publish. That was a student paper, that psychological distress. Now that student became masters, and they're doing clinical now. They moved on. So some of that is one of the reasons that these papers we publish them one off, and then there's no one person who is looking after all that type of avenue of research. I wish I would be that person in some time, but for now they're just one-off papers. So they give us an overall picture, but except the first paper that was followed up by the second paper, which had 31 authors, we generally did not replicate our. In fact, the final paper was kind of a replication of the one that the hate begets warmth, in a sense, but it also had more elements in it. So that's how the nature of research is, I think.
There's one question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think your study that you're just starting now, will it be any bit affected by the Palestine-Israeli conflict that we are seeing? Because there is some level of, and even if the NZ ABS is going on now, because it is influencing people's perspective, or there are quite a lot of people who are consciously talking about it. I'm just thinking, are you going to discuss this?
Yeah, I think, well, one thing that I wanted to in fact mention earlier in response to Professor Imran's question also was that although we collect names and identities, it is confidential. So I would not say that people only just show that they are good toward Muslims, because at the end of the day, no one knows the identities. But that again, coming back to your point, applies here too. So generally, I think the sentiment, like what I get from the community, because we have started data collection 3 weeks ago, and I would be very frank about it, we do not have a very good response so far, and I think it is partly because people are mentally really in the Middle East, most of Muslims are, and it is troubling, and that is also why we want to be respectful and don't push people to, hey, you need to participate whether you can or not, and we are trying to be very sensitive of that. But part of me thinks that because of what is happening, people will generally be less likely to participate. I hope that's not the case, but I think this is another element. It's a very long question. It takes about 1 hour to fill. But on top of that, we have some research assistants who have families in Palestine, for example, in Gaza, and we also have community who we want to reach out to, but they are sad. So that element is there, and that is also why we are trying to be very very careful, and only time will tell as to how that affected our response or our goal. But the way I see it, like, of course, that is generally on everyone's mind here, what the situation in the Middle East. But again, everyone is still going on their business. Everyone is still, going to university, going to shops, going to business, driving their Uber and all that. So although, we have some mental connection there, we are going by on our daily business. And I do hope that because of that, people will also feel like, well, this is also part of our daily business. I might as well, give an hour to Michelle and fill the questionnaire that she brought with herself. That is my hope, but only time will tell. Also, there's another element. Yesterday she received the paper questionnaires, so we are a bit late.
Just adding on this point, actually, because this is a methodological kind of issue, because as a planning academics, the councils are always doing a lot of survey that have consequences on people property prices, parking, schooling, everything. And WhatsApp is here and probably knows that. And ethnic kind of a response is almost negligible. They are not spending on time. They are not giving on this thing. Although their property prices go down or up, are they having really their kind of a consequences? And it's not in Palmerston North, but other part of New Zealand as well. And that's I wonder, that in terms of the response of somebody giving for 1 hour kind of a questionnaire, or there is any other you are thinking about the mixed method or a other way of collecting the data, Facebook data?
In the future, yes. In the future, yes. For the current project, no, because this is the methodology that we got ethics approval for. But also, there's another thing. We have, based on 2018 census, we have 62,000 Muslims in New Zealand, and we want data from 3,000 Muslims. That's one. The other thing is, the way I want to see it, this is what it will bring with it, but I need 1 hour of your whole year. And you don't have to do it in one go. You can do it in different days. Get the questionnaire, give it 10 minutes a day. It will finish in a week, and you can submit it. The third element, or the third way that I can still talk about is that think about, we did a consultation last year. Result of that, we found that generally the second generation Muslim kids who went to university here, they will be more likely to participate than the first generation. And I can tell you why. As a first generation myself, I come here, my first job or my first idea is to settle here, get a job, have a home, provide for my family. These ideas of research and the future and self-actualization, and these things come very secondary or even tertiary. But also because my identity is back in Afghanistan, and I also have friends here who are from Afghanistan and Pakistan and India, so I can socially connect very well with them. But for a generation that is born here, they grow up here, they go to school here, they do not necessarily.
How many are those?
Huh?
How many are
a lot.
Out of 60,000?
25%.
25%.
Well, 25% of New Zealanders are born, Muslims are born in New Zealand.
In the university?
In our data, that's what our data shows.
Okay.
So 25% of Muslims are born in New Zealand. But the other thing also is that those who go to university, those who went to institutions here, and second generation, they generally their identity is different from my identity. So they identify, they know each other as Muslims. They connect with each other via MSAs, Muslim Student Associations. So to them, their parents being from Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, that becomes secondary. They connect with this new identity that they are developing. And for them, the sense of identity is more important. And that is why we hope that the Muslim Diversity Study, which the name says, and in fact, I kind of have a little bit of evidence for that, because almost all of my research assistants, we had 92 applications from across New Zealand. And the team that we picked, one question that we asked them was, why do you want to work with us in this project? And I could say that 100% of them said that because I see the need for a project like this. And I see that this is important for my identity. I have one, I will not mention the name, but they told me that I never even wanted to do this job, but then I say, in the first line it said Muslims and psychology, and I said, I'm applying. So from our youth perspective, and those who know the value of research, I think participating in this type of initiative is very important. They see it as important, but also in last year's consultation also showed that it will be women who will be more likely to participate than men, and I think that will also be the case.
Yeah.
Well, that's because women end up doing all the unpaid labor in all areas of work, if I may say so. But actually, we went into sort of methodology. Actually, I will circle back the question back, and maybe if you could give me a brief answer, was that when there is a religious conflict, there is a polarization of ideologies.
Yeah.
And people start attaching themselves to the ideology that they are closer to.
Okay.
And when it says it's a Muslim study, then do you think that the Muslim response, or for that matter, other people who have other religious affiliation, their responses will be slightly more polarized, slightly stronger because of this, just from a psychology perspective, from your experience, that do you think that that probably this year's study may see, from a religious perspective, a more divide or not?
I mean, I don't know, but we have done such boosters before too. So we had, for example, NZDVS, not me, NZDVS had a Maori booster a few years ago. And the reason for that was because we didn't have good Maori representation. We wanted to represent Maori. So the way we talk about it, because we are underrepresented, we want to increase that representation. So that is how we want to.
Yeah, but what I mean is that, would you think that the respondents who will fill, do you think...
You mean Muslim or non-Muslim?
Oh, and anyone who has a religious affiliation.
I don't know.
I suppose that's an empirical question, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
That, you know, it might have an impact, because when there's a political religious conflict, it can trigger. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what it does.
It will be. I mean, these are really interesting questions, and I feel like I don't know answer to many of them.
Can you piggyback with
Absolutely.
So I'm sorry to go back to a method question, Usman. First of all, this is brilliant, and it's so important in terms of the question of Muslim representation. So my question is twofold. One is sort of pointing to a method issue, and then asking a broader theoretical question around Islamophobia. So the method question is, how do you connect the science with the activism, trust, and community? And what I will sort of situate this in the context of the work that we do at CARE. So say, for instance, the work that we have been doing around Islamophobia, it's in our 5th year, and we haven't really published peer-reviewed journal articles because we work with community advisory groups, and they have felt that the timing is not right to publish it, simply because of the likelihood of over-surveillance that might further contribute to harm rather than good. So I guess, and that connects to trust in a way, that how do you negotiate trust in community in relationship to, say, data ownership and the framing of, or the presentation of the data in a settler colonial context?
Well, so is it like how Muslims, you mean, will see it? Yeah, I mean, we basically give this presentation in different ways when we talk with the Muslim audience. So depending on who you were presenting to, we try to know who our audience is, and we tell them that this is what we have been doing, this is what has been done so far. We see the need in this area, and we want to do this work going forward. We don't actually try very hard to convince someone if they do not see the value in it, and that's the nature of research. We tell them that this is what we want to do. If you think that this is valuable, please participate. And they generally don't tell us whether they will or will not participate. But I honestly don't have the answer to, because you have more insights compared to me, because community has told you that it's not a good time to publish. But when I did my consultation with the community last year, the general sentiment was that is a need for this, and maybe it's time. Some people said it's too late. Why you have not been doing this? Biased here because I, of course, did not talk with the representation of the community. I just talked with the people that I could find. It was a very, random, I could say biased way of talking with the community. But generally, I talk with people who have research background and who see the value in research. But more importantly, they have seen that we've presented one side of the story. As Fawad was mentioning earlier, from Fawad, right?
Yes.
From a non-Muslim perspective. So that flip side of that is how Muslims. So I mean, only time will tell. If we do not get representation, it could be because people feel like, okay, well, it's not worth it. But I honestly, again, I don't have any answer to that question.
Mohan,
What do you think?
I'm just thinking that because this topic won't go away,
No.
there is no right time or wrong time.
Yeah.
Probably
Yeah.
I would say that this is so much ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
So probably whenever the data and research is ready,
Yeah.
it should go to the...
And I guess that's where the question of trust comes in terms of the feedback loop, Imran Bhai.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. Say, for instance, attitude toward police. You have survey items on attitude toward police, toward security, toward intelligence.
Yeah. How
Just-
happy you are with
yes.
or
And let's say if you take
satisfied.
social measures in terms of, say, trust. I'm throwing a hypothetical example, and you show that there is low trust in police, in security, right? That is where the question of framing comes in, and the question of trust, because you present that data in a journal article, it gets published, it gets peer reviewed, right? How that gets taken up by the structure, we have no control of, and that's where I guess I was going with in terms of the community ownership of data.
that is
Just like
one
your
thing that.
picture in the just
Yes,
like your picture in the
exactly.
newspaper.
Yeah.
Yes.
It can be taken.
Of course,
Yes, so
we
that
have
is-
examples of that. In fact, and the number of times that my colleagues, I could say colleagues, they have been wrongly represented in the media. So one of them, he does religious research, and next day the media says he is a Catholic priest. So that has happened, but that is in fact one of the reasons that. So especially when the psychological impact of the paper that talks about empathy versus sympathy was published. For example, there was a call. Some people said, can we go and talk about this in the media? And we decided against it. And the reason for that, again, is because unless I come and present it the way I see it, it could be taken out of the context. And in fact, only 2 weeks ago, the University of Canterbury did a story on my research. And it is only on the University of Canterbury website. And I was asked, it probably will be taken by media. Do you want to interview the media? I talked with my team, and we decided against it for the same reason. Because media, I don't say I don't trust the media, but we have strong evidence because media will probably sway it the way they want, considering what the current political climate is. And it might make something that we never said, and that is why we generally we present our work in this way. We write for the conversation, for example, but we generally my stance on that is, and what I learned from my seniors there is that unless it's the written piece like this, we don't just go and interview with the media.
And I guess the media is just one structure, Usman. What to me in my work becomes quite evident is really SIS. If we sort of name the structures in the room and their mechanisms of over surveillance of Muslims, the police and the surveillance of Muslims, basically structures of the crown. Where Islamophobia is part of, you talk about ideologies, the Fatima. Islamophobia is the organizing ideology, if you will, of the crown. So
And then it goes into profiling, which goes, when you have those profiles with the security and with and then whoever fits the profile, so that circles back to why probably Al-Nur Mosque, because there was quite a lot of people who could be profiled as
Going.
Yes.
And I have another question. These Muslim representation groups, whatever that's students' union or whatever. I mean, it was quite interesting for me that 25% of the Muslim New Zealanders are New Zealand born. So are those groups actually representing 25%, that 25% appropriately?
I don't know. Again, with data we will find out. But there's another thing also. What happens is, and I can give you an example from the room. For example, one of the say Mashallah is not my RA. She's interested to participate. She gets the questionnaire. She might also think like it's probably meaningful for my parents too. They might also be able to convince their parents to participate. So we are like the way we message it, or the way we talk about it with the youth, is to tell them like, if you see meaning in it and if you think this is important, then you could take a couple more and see like if you also, because we try our best to have as many age groups there as possible. And I did this just a few days ago in Al-Nur Mosque. A friend came and he said, I'm interested. I said, how many? And he said, why? I said, yeah, I know his family. I said, you have this and this in your family. So do you want? And he said, yes. So that is, it's kind of a snowball something that we're trying to.
But that's also a matter of trust and
Yes.
and relationship, and it really plays a big role. Otherwise, one would feel, if someone just randomly gave it to me, as you said, I'm
Absolutely.
thinking, it's asking me all these things,
Yeah.
and if it comes from someone like Mashal or someone I know, then I'm like, okay.
Absolutely. If I go to Manawatu Muslim Association and tell them, hey, I'm this guy and I'm doing this, say like, okay. I mean, I will be surprised if they will, that they will, because I have seen it in Auckland. I had rapport with them. I met with them a few times, and next time I go, I say like, yeah, good. But if a person from that mosque or from the community, they are involved in because they trust that person. They only know me, but they trust the person that has been in their community. I think that is more.
Thank you so much,
Yes,
Usman,
thank you.
for taking the time, for being here with us and sharing your research and your ideas. And thank you to everyone who's in the room for being here and for all your participation. Happy Jummah to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
guys.
so much. Thank you all for